Um, my name is Eliana Kim, and I'm a fourth year med student at UCSF. I'm super excited to introduce you all to our keynote speaker, Julia Olson. Julia is the founder, executive director, and chief legal counsel for Our Children's Trust, the nonprofit public interest law firm that provides strategic campaign-based legal services to youth from diverse backgrounds to secure their rights to a safe climate system. Julia has been a trailblazing leader, litigator, and legal strategist in climate and environmental law for over 2.5 decades. After graduating from the UC Hastings College of Law in 1997, she launched her own law practice in the Bay Area to litigate public interest environmental cases on behalf of grassroots conservation organizations. She founded Our Children's Trust in 2010 when, as a new mother, she realized the shortcomings of environmental statutory law in redressing the greatest threat to her children and children everywhere, the climate crisis. She and her team at Our Children's Trust have since pioneered a globally replicated model for youth-led legal action that draws from and integrates children's rights, constitutional rights, climate science, and the public trust doctrine to protect the planet's most vulnerable citizens. Our Children's Trust is the only legal organization on the planet dedicated exclusively to representing young people in lawsuits against their governments to protect their fundamental human rights from the dangers of fossil fuel energy policy, all at no cost to the young plaintiffs. Our Children's Trust represented the plaintiffs recently in Held v. State of Montana, where the first ever constitutional climate trial in the nation's history resulted in a sweeping win, with the judge declaring Montana's fossil fuel promoting laws unconstitutional. Julia is the lead counsel in Juliana v. US, the groundbreaking constitutional climate change case brought by 21 young Americans, including 11 Black, Brown, and Indigenous youth, against the US government for violating their Fifth Amendment rights. Julia and the young plaintiffs she represents were featured in the award-winning documentary on Netflix about their landmark case, Youth v. Gov. Julia and Our Children's Trust are the recipients of Rose Walters Prize for Global Environmental Activism. She received the Carrie Rydberg Award for Environmental Activism in 2017 and the Catherine and George Alexander Law Prize in 2022. She is a member of Rachel's Network Circle Advisors and was named one of Bloomberg's Green 30 for 2020. She has been an invited speaker before the Conference of Chief Justices, National Association of Women Judges, and numerous universities and law schools. And with that, Julia, we were so excited to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Eliana. You can hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Thank you for that really kind introduction. And thanks to Elizabeth and Dr. Lisa Patel and all of the students and the staff and the faculty at Stanford and UC Davis and UCSF for hosting me and most importantly for putting on this really important event. And I'm going to share my screen so we can have this conversation together. All right. So I just want to start off by saying I think what you all do at this symposium and what the students work so hard to organize is having one of the most important conversations that we can be having in our democracy today because of how significant the role of climate crisis and chaos is in the health and well-being of every child born today and all future generations. So bravo for hosting this and continuing this great work together. For those who are not familiar with Our Children's Trust, we pioneered the rights-based youth climate movement that started 13 years ago. And since the time that we launched our initial round of cases all on behalf of youth to protect their fundamental rights back in 2011, there have been over 50 cases brought by young people around the world against about as many countries, and even more being filed every year. And when we do this work and when we launched this effort back in 2010, we did so based on 3 core principles. The first is that we advocate for and elevate the voices of diverse youth. We do this work globally and centrally here in the United States. And we're focused on intergenerational justice, so protecting the rights of youth today and all future generations. We also advocate for science-based and legally enforceable systemic remedies against governments when we go to court. And the third really important principle is everything we're doing is based in and grounded in human rights laws. So a lot of constitutional work, as you'll see as we go. And to just directly and immediately tie this into the work that you all do as a medical community, core to every single one of our cases in our representation of young people is bringing in the science of medicine and public health and telling the stories of how young people are being affected by the climate crisis from the time they're in utero to the time they're born and as they grow through toddlerhood and adolescence and into their young adulthood. And in order to do that, we work with experts. So Dr. Susan Pacheco is one of our pediatricians who has prepared an expert report in one of our cases against the federal government that I'll talk about. And this paper, which came out in 2022 in the New England Journal of Medicine, had this image that became an exhibit in another of our cases that I'll tell you about today. And we're bringing in these stories of the different exposure pathways that cause the health injuries to the youth we represent, from the acute events like extreme weather events, where we represent youth who have lost homes, to the chronic heat stress, exposure to wildfire smoke, and also the disease vectors. So we represent kids who suffer from Lyme disease and other diseases that are borne by ticks, and especially in our East Coast plaintiffs. And then we're looking at the social disruption factors, such as school closures or displacements and evacuations and migrations. So all of these issues come up in our cases, and we rely upon experts, like many of you in the room, to assist us in this work. Another really important part of the intergenerational inequity that we bring into our cases is this evidence about the fact that a child born in 2020 will experience a 2 to 7-fold increase in extreme events compared to people born in 1960. So this is just a small sample of the type of evidence we're bringing in on the health of young people, and it's all vital to our cases. So turning to the first case, I want to share with you, this is the Held versus State of Montana case. It was the first ever children's constitutional climate trial in US history, and really the only kind of trial to be held like this in the world. It took place in June of this past summer. And just quickly, what this case is about is Montana had laws on the books that said the state was required to promote fossil fuels, including new extraction, and they were to do so without taking into account the consequences to climate impacts, to the health of the environment in Montana or the health of its children. So we sued the state on behalf of 16 young people to have the court declare those laws unconstitutional and to stop that conduct from occurring. In order to do that and have a really successful trial, we relied on a lot of fabulous experts. So these are the 10 experts who testified in the case. Some of them are climate scientists. Some are experts on the water tower in Montana. We had indigenous experts, as well as the energy transition experts who testified that clean, renewable energy is the cheapest and best form of energy that Montana could be using presently. And really importantly, and to the work that you all do, we had medical experts. So Dr. Lori Byron, whose name you're probably familiar with, is a pediatrician in Montana. She's practicing, she has a lot of experience working in the Native community. And She testified about the health and well-being of plaintiffs being put at risk today and adversely affected by the ongoing fossil fuel energy system that Montana promotes, from the air pollution coming out of that system and the climate impacts that result. She said that health was already harming the youth from the increase in global temperatures, um, that health was already being harmed by that increase, and that simply treating the problem of the impacts to the youth was not enough, and that the most important intervention is to actually address the underlying causes, which is the ongoing fossil fuel energy system and the further extraction of fossil fuels. We also brought in Dr. Lisa Van Susteren, who's a psychiatrist. She specializes in climate anxiety specifically, and she really brought in that testimony of both the acute health effects, the acute mental health effects that climate crisis causes, as well as the long-term and chronic effects, including things like PTSD, anxiety, increases in depression, and so on, and how that affects kids in their early development and also throughout their lives. There was, a lot more testimony, but that just gives you a glimpse into some of the testimony that the youth presented that was then corroborated by the experts in the case. And so after a 7-day trial and presenting all of this evidence in support of the claims, 2 months later, the judge issued her ruling. And you can see from the headlines here, it was a big win. It was a 103-page decision, mostly made up of what are called findings of fact. And so after a trial, which is all about the evidence, courts have to determine what was true, what were the true facts in the case. And she found many things, and it's an opinion worth reading because it really lays out the evidence. But she found that the plaintiffs had proven as children and youth that they were disproportionately harmed by fossil fuel pollution and by climate impacts. She really importantly found that every additional ton of greenhouse gases that's emitted into the air exacerbates those plaintiffs' injuries and locks in further irreversible climate injuries to them. And she found that Montana's greenhouse gas contributions are not de minimis. So this was a central argument of the government and is in most instances. And she said, these emissions are nationally and globally significant because, again, every additional ton is contributing to the climate change that is causing plaintiffs' injuries. And so based on all the evidence, she held at the end, her conclusion of law is that Montana's climate, environment, and natural resources are unconstitutionally degraded and depleted due to the current atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases and climate change. So just want to take you down a different scientific path than you're used to going down and talk about CO2 as a pollutant for a moment. We are at about 422 parts per million of carbon dioxide. And the scientific community thinks that to stabilize the climate system and avoid chaos, we need to get back down to 350 parts per million or below. So the key lesson from that is, just like in any other pollution scenario, we need to set standards that create safe levels for how much pollution a system can allow. Much like you think about healthy blood sugar levels or cholesterol levels. And looking just at the symptom, which is temperature in this case, is not a good metric for judging our progress towards getting to a safe standard. So just a bit to remember as you think about your intersection with this work. So I'm going to move on quickly to 2 other cases. This is our case against the state of Hawaii and some of our 14 youth plaintiffs we represent there, including the Hawaii Department of Transportation and the governor. The Hawaii case is different in that Hawaii has actually set targets that are meaningful in addressing the climate crisis. They have said that they want to decarbonize their energy systems by 2045 and get off of fossil fuels, which is great. But their transportation emissions are going up, and transportation is the biggest source of fossil fuel pollution in Hawaii. They're one of the biggest users of oil of any state in the nation. And so we're trying to change that system. So you can tell the power of the stories and the incredible harm that some of these youth have experienced just in their young lives. So ultimately, we're hoping that the court will declare unconstitutional the actions of the government of Hawaii in not meeting their deadlines and not transitioning off of fossil fuels. And again, trial is set for June 24th. So keep your eye out on that and join our mailing list to get involved and get updates. And the last thing I will say, and then I'll wrap up so we have time for questions, is this was one of our flagship cases, the Juliana versus United States case on behalf of 21 youth from all across the country. It's under the Fifth Amendment of the US Constitution and invokes traditional substantive due process and equal protection claims against the US government over the national fossil fuel energy system. And we were hung up in court for a long time. And along the way, I want to point out that some of the most important evidence, again, in this federal case was about the exacerbated medical conditions of the youth, including these two youth, Isaac and Tia, who suffer from asthma and live in the West, damage to property, much like Kaliko's, and psychological harm. So it's a common thread through all of our cases. The good news is we are back on track in the Juliana case to head to trial. And I'll just read this briefly, that Judge Ann Aiken, who's our federal judge, wrote this summer in an opinion that it is a foundational doctrine that when government conduct catastrophically harms American citizens, the judiciary is constitutionally required to perform its independent role and determine whether the challenged conduct, not exclusively committed to any branch by the Constitution, is unconstitutional. And so we hope to have a trial date scheduled soon. And if you want to get involved in any way or learn more, there's a lot of ways to do that. You can volunteer, and I'll just show you a few slides. You can snap the QR codes if you're interested, or we can send these around later. But you can join our mailing list to hear more updates on these really important cases. We're looking for youth plaintiffs in California right now. So if you have ideas of young people who might want to get involved with us, let us know. Donating is always important. Most of our support comes from individuals, not foundations. And I will leave it there and open it up for questions.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Olson, for such a powerful talk and for sharing the videos of the youth plaintiffs. We have until 2:50 for Q&A. I think what was demonstrated from your presentation is just how devastating and real climate change has been for so many young people, and also how powerful advocacy and taking legal action can be, how that can elicit such a huge change for an entire state population, an entire country, and globally as well. I'm sure that many of us are feeling very inspired after learning about the scale of change that you and the youth have been able to elicit. The first question is, what are some suggestions that you might have for health professional students, such as medical students, nursing students, and other graduate students in leveraging their studies and knowledge to elicit change at the systems and legal level for climate action? And what are some potential areas of collaboration that do you see between sort of the legal experts and like the field of medicine?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think students at any level are really the change makers within institutions. I see this in our own work with law students who work with us all year long. And it was really law students demanding from professors that they wanted climate law taught at schools, and they wanted to learn about our cases that have made the work that we're doing so prevalent in law schools around the country. Students are writing papers on our cases. They're writing about constitutional climate rights. They're asking provocative questions. And it's really changing the legal academy. So I think you can take that and translate that into what medical students can do as well. Demanding that climate change health impacts being incorporated into education, and the institutions look at their position on the climate crisis and on human rights in relationship to the climate crisis, and what needs to change in the healthcare systems to really respond adequately to what's happening on the ground with climate chaos. I also think, expanding intersectional thinking is important. It continues to grow, but there's a real synergy between medicine and law. I mean, if you think about almost everything you do as medical practitioners is affected by law, right? Whether it's malpractice law or insurance law. And I think incorporating more of constitutional rights there's an obvious intersection already around abortion rights and reproductive care that people think about, but climate rights is also really important to access to healthcare. And so having more intersectionality and thinking about, as medical students and ultimately practitioners, how can you be thinking about the data you have access to and the research you can conduct, and taking that information and bringing it into policy forums? So whether it's at the local level or the state or national level, participating in the places where laws are made, including in the courtroom. There's a real need for that kind of medical expertise in a lot of climate cases. So those are just some of the ways I think people can get involved and work with at that intersection.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer. So it is 7:40, or sorry, 7 where I am because I'm in Korea. It is 2:49 a.m. In California. So I think we do need to wrap up, but thank you so much again for joining us today as our keynote and for your wonderful presentation. And I'd also like to acknowledge and extend a special thank you to Dr. Lisa Patel for connecting us to Julia and our Children's Trust and making this keynote possible. So with that, we have a 15-minute break, or a 10-minute break, sorry, and we'll resume for our next session, which starts at 3 p.m. Pacific time. The next session is titled Empowering Tomorrow, Cutting Edge Climate Change and Health Education.
Thank you, Eliana. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.